And in today's episode, we have a very special guest who's pursuing his master's in technical communication at the RWTH Aachen University. His areas of interest include data science and machine learning, network science, scientometrics, and agent-based modeling. Quite some technical jargon there. He has been working at the chair of communication sciences as a student assistant and has worked at Optimo, where he did some stuff with data analysis, which we'll talk more about during the conversation. And he has also been doing a lot of other stuff which I'm not aware of at this moment. His work experience includes a unique blend of technical skills and communication skills. I know Johannes from Toastmasters, and I have witnessed his incredible speaking ability and the way he prepares his speeches, the way he structures his presentations is unique and interesting to say the least. The way he combines his technical abilities with his communication skills is worth witnessing. And if you know him, you'll hear him speak things like, my work is so fulfilling to me, I enjoy my work, and this is probably something that you hear only a very few people say. So without any further ado, let's get started. So I welcome Johannes Nakayama.
Thank you, man. That was quite the introduction. Quite the introduction to live up
So
to.
I mean, that's the truth.
Thanks, man.
So my very first question to you would be a very basic one. Who is Johannes? I mean, I know you for quite some time now, but you have done so many things, and you have done so many different kinds of projects. You're into technical aspects of things and also communication aspects of things. So how do you like to be described? Basically, are you a technical person who is into communication, or are you a communication person who is also into technical? So what's your take?
That's actually quite a complicated question for me. So, mm, I think about that last part. I think I came into my studies as a communication person with also a technical interest. But I think I switched it a little bit during my studies. I think the more I got into it, the more I realized that I'm really interested in the technical stuff as well. And yeah, lately have been much more interested in the technical side of things. Um, yeah, but yeah, it's really hard to put into words for me because I think when I started my studies, I had no technical skills whatsoever. I was just yeah, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So this the major that I chose was kind of perfect for me because it's interdisciplinary between communication science and computer science. So I had kind of something from both worlds, and yeah, I just ran with it. And I think over the years I have been I've learned what I like about it. You know, sometimes you don't know from the get-go what you want to do, but then when you get into something, you find your areas.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you started more with an emphasis on communication, but now you are kind of enjoying the interdisciplinary nature of it, but also you're more into the technical aspect of things.
Yeah. I think I'm still. I mean, I've been doing this for a few years now, but I'm
Yeah.
still surprised how much I enjoy the technical side of things because I really didn't go into my studies with much of a technical ability, so I never thought that that would be an option for me. But the deeper I get into the matter, the more I enjoy it. So that's been really great over the past couple of years.
Yeah. Tell us about your work experiences, the things that you have worked on, also because that's also uh, a variety of different things that you have done. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that's maybe a great summary of why it's so hard for me to give a concise answer to your last question. Is
Yeah.
so I think if you want, I can run you through all my work experience from my teenage years, which
Yeah, sure, sure.
includes some quite
That
untechnical.
would be that would be perfect. Yeah.
I think the first job that I ever had was to deliver newspapers, which was quite horrendous. Um, but in my late teenage years, I think when I was 18-ish, I was a choir conductor. So I conducted two choirs, which was quite an interesting experience, especially when you're 18 years old and everyone in the choir is like, I don't know, on average 60 years old or so. So I had to learn quite a lot during that time to um, be confident in front of people, especially during the practice sessions. Um, and yeah, when I started my studies, I applied for a job, which I found on a board at university, which was in a sort of an office for social projects, and it was still not very technical, the work there. I did some PR work, so public relations work, and I was also, just a student helper. So I was responsible for all kinds of things. I helped organize events, yeah, and I wrote most of the text there. And when I wrote my bachelor's thesis, I really got into the topic of what I was doing, and also the institute where I was writing my bachelor's thesis. And I asked them if I can work there, and they said yes, of course. And since then, that was, I think, 2, 3 years ago, um, I'm employed there at the Institute of Communication Science. Um, and at first, I did this in parallel with my first job, and but then I had to sort of I had some job offers over the time, and I declined all of them because I was so fond of my old job at the office for social projects, because I had a really great team there and I loved the people there. But then I got an offer that was too good to decline, which was at Optinu. You already talked about it in the introduction. And yeah, there I was kind of pretty much. I'm not sure if I can say like a data scientist, but I had like the responsibilities of handling the data of the company. It was also a startup company, so I had much more responsibility than you would usually have um, on a student job. So that was really great. But then, yeah, it's really stressful to have two jobs at a time. So at some point,
Yeah.
yeah, I just work more hours at the Institute for Communication Science now.
So you're working at the Institute of Communication Science as well right now.
Yeah, I'm still working there. Yeah.
So that's the only job that you have currently, or you also have? Okay. So you chose out of the different job opportunities that you had, you chose this one as the one that you are doing currently. So also, which one of these experiences or work opportunities do you find the most interesting, and the ones that had given you the most opportunity to grow?
I think it's so hard to say. I think for now it's definitely my current job, because I have a lot of opportunities to pursue many of my interests, and I'm lucky enough that me and my student assistant colleagues, we are also prompted to contribute ideas as well. So we are not just minions
Yeah.
running around doing some jobs here and there, but we are also very much encouraged to contribute ideas to the general process. But I think almost every opportunity in the jobs that I had in the last years were really fantastic. Like in Optinu, it was also I was responsible for most of what I was working, because it's, like I said, a startup company. So I took a lot of, I think I learned a whole lot there. and yeah, in the Stadtteilbüro, this is this like office for social projects. I had many. Yeah, I had to grow more as a person because you had to handle a lot of unusual stuff. It was sort of a social project in a disadvantaged part of the city, so that was really interesting too. Can't really say which one was the best experience.
Yeah, because all of them were, enriching in a very different way. You learned
Mm.
a different kind of skills one of the experiences, and at another work opportunity, you growed more technically, and so it was like a holistic experience if you combine the different kinds of work experiences. So
Yeah,
let's talk more about your current work experience. What is it that you do now at the Institute of Communication Sciences?
yeah. So I'm part of a junior research group, and it's called Digitale Mündigkeit. It sadly doesn't really translate into English, but I think it's close
Digital
to.
communication, or
No, it's more digital citizenship, but not
okay,
exactly. Like Mündigkeit is I think it's a notion that goes back to Immanuel Kant, and it means something like you're a self or you're a responsible citizen, something like that. It's not
okay.
easy to say. And the premise of the project is to research that or research do research in terms of digital media and society. So, how do social media platforms, for example, impact opinion formation and something like that? And I have chosen to go deeper into the network science and modeling aspect of that. So, at first, what I was doing a lot was just data analysis. So I analyzed a lot of the data that we did, that we gathered, and I also was involved in writing some publications there. But lately, um, I put my focus more onto sort of the network science and agent-based modeling aspect. So I think we are going to talk about agent-based modeling later as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's a simulation approach to modeling social systems and other systems as well.
Yeah. So this is like the field that you have chosen to pursue for quite some time now, in the future, right? So out of all the different variety of experiences that you have had, this is the one that you have selected and are pursuing right now. So is it a research career that you have chosen right now, or what exactly is it?
Well, to be honest, I'm not set on that yet. So
Okay, okay.
research is really, really interesting to me, and I would love to pursue
Yeah.
like a career in science maybe. But I'm not entirely determined what I want to do. I think I will definitely try to pursue a PhD after my studies. Um, but even then, nowadays it's not clear that when you do a PhD that you will also stay at university. So I'm not, yeah, I'm not. It's not set in stone. I don't know what I'm going to do after that.
Yeah, yeah. As you spend more time with a work experience or with a project, you get to know more aspects of it, and then you become more clear as a result. Perhaps also, uh, if I had asked you 5 years or 10 years before, what would you be wanting to do? You'd probably have no clue at all. So
Oh yeah, definitely. I would have given a very different answer probably.
yeah, certainly. So it changes with time. So, but how do you think you have evolved as a person and also professionally over the past several years?
So over the past several years, I think for the first time I have pursued something that I think that I can stick with. So I think it all started with my bachelor's thesis because I had to learn the programming language R for that, which is also like a specialized language for data analysis. So and yeah, well, arguably data science and machine learning as well, but it doesn't work as well as Python. But yeah, I had to learn this language, and I was really fascinated by it, and it was kind of by accident because at first So I had the choice of doing it with SPSS and R, and
Okay.
I really didn't like SPSS when I used it the first time, so I chose R. And from that, I sort of ventured into data science because I obviously when you learn a programming language like R, you have to, or yeah, you get into those data sciencey things right away. And I read a book at the time which was R for Data Science by Hadley Wickham. He's like one of the gods of the R sphere.
Okay.
Really fascinating guy. Not much older than me, I think, like 10 years older, but he's done so much work that it's almost unbelievable that he did all that.
Oh,
And yeah, since then I've been almost maniacally following this path. So I tried to learn everything that I could get my hands on, and since then have also gone into Python and Julia, and yeah,
yeah.
at the same time I tried to become more apt at in the literature of the domain that we are doing research in. So
Okay. Yeah, I'll go more into the details of the programming languages, and you talked about SPSS. What's that?
it's a statistical software, so or a software to do statistics. And I really don't like it, to be honest. I'm not sure if I can say that it's a proprietary software, but
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy working with it. And R is open source, so yeah, I also wanted to support that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think now I'll start to dig a bit deeper into what you study and the more details about the kind of things that you do, because you talk about data analysis with great passion and interest, and
Mhm.
also about agent-based modeling. I'm not sure how they are related and how they apply to the projects that you're pursuing right now. So I'll start one by one because there's a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, sure.
So, what is your understanding of technical communication, the course that
So
you're doing right now?
yeah, so thankfully you can interpret it in a very or in a lot of ways because
Okay.
I think the classical interpretation of it. Oh, by the way, I'm really sorry about the background noises. I think there's like a barbecue party in the garden right next to my window.
No problem. No
Yeah.
problem about that.
Um, so technical communication is like the classic interpretation of it would be something which I think would translate into technical editing. So those are people who write instructions for technical devices or computer programs or something like that, which quite frankly I didn't find really interesting from the get-go. But thankfully
Okay.
enough, you can interpret it in many different ways. So for me, it's more about how humans interface with computer systems because my major is or my one of my majors is computer science. So
Hmm.
um, you can also in our study program you could choose from four different technical subjects, which were or by now it's only three. I think it's computer science, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering. And you're supposed to be some sort of connecting element between
Okay.
different domains. So sometimes, for example, what you could pursue is when you have people talking in jargon and very technical terms all the time, then
Hmm.
it's your job to make it understandable for people who don't have the same expertise. And
Uh, so in a way, you're bridging the gap between the highly technical information or people or work, and the people who are not familiar with the technical jargon, as you mentioned. So,
yeah, that's exactly it,
okay.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talk about your work at the Institute of Communication Sciences. Can you also discuss in more detail what exactly you are doing and how you started, and how you evolved there at the Institute of Communication Sciences? Because I think you have worked for around 2 years or 3 years here already. So
Mhm.
what's your journey here?
Yeah, so I can talk about some projects that I had there. Like, I think one that captures this very well is, I think, really the first project that I had there, which was together with another student assistant there. We were allowed to take part in a competition, which was a dataset challenge, and the task was to analyze a dataset by yeah, it was on Google searches. So what they did basically was they developed a plugin and then sent or had about 1,000 people download the plugin, and this plugin searched for a set of search terms or compiled Google search results for a set of search terms for each person, and then aggregated all the data.
Okay.
And it was our task to find out if there's like bias in the search results. So if different people see different search results, um,
Uh,
which
okay.
is which is kind of the conjecture of one guy called Eli Pariser about filter bubble. This is like the buzzword that everyone is using. Like
What's that?
like technology and delivers different content to different people through recommender algorithms and so on. So the fear is that different people just see different realities, and this is why people have so different views of the world right now. Yeah, and our task was sort of to find or to see if that's true for the data that we had. Yeah, and that was actually quite a great project to learn because yeah, it was a quite a tedious data set. It wasn't like your classical tabular data where you can easily understand and explore the data, but it was in sort of
Okay.
a nested JSON file,
Mm.
and we had to unnest it and explore it a lot. And yeah, we didn't really find anything quite interesting, but it was a good experience, and it's also quite exemplary for the things that we are trying to do.
And so understanding the possibility of biases was what your project essentially was. So this was your first involvement in a data analysis project, right?
Yeah, except for my bachelor's thesis before that,
Okay. Okay.
and I had also like done some toy projects on myself, but nothing major.
So you say that you really enjoy playing with data and being involved in data analysis and data science. So what is it about this particular stream that you love the most?
Ha, good question. um, yeah, that's really a good question. I think it's conducive to the way that I think, and maybe this is also like a process that amplifies itself because I've noticed, and I've also been quite self-critical about that I started to think everything in data. Like I also turned a lot of things of my everyday life into data. For example, my work times and the way I do sports, like with all these quantified self apps, like
Oh,
these
okay.
running apps and workout apps and so on, and which which was fun for a time, but then it's not for me. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. I like transforming and extracting value from data, I think. So it's for me, it's a really fun process to explore a data set and visualize certain aspects of it and understand it better. I think it's yeah. I use it mostly for exploratory research because I think in science shouldn't be data driven. You shouldn't let your scientific process follow the data, but you should rather start with hypotheses and then find the data that you need to prove those hypotheses. But yeah, it gives me a lot of ideas, and in many cases, it's also quite useful. And yeah,
So essentially, it's the process of playing with data and actually getting a data set that does not mean anything and using it to create something meaningful, for example a data visualization, and then you can arrive at a conclusion uh, from a data set that initially does not make any sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also one thing that's great about coding in general is that you have
Yeah.
those little spikes of dopamine every now and then when something works, which you have been working on for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it just comes down to the flow process, because uh, in a flow process, for example, you have to have an activity that's challenging enough, and plus you have to have the right skill level, and you basically have to be getting a particular set of feedback from the activity that you're pursuing. So in coding
Mm.
you really get quick feedback, so you try something and then you see the results immediately, and whether or not it's good or bad, you can go to the next attempt. So in a way I consider it as a form of game, if
Mm.
I can say it that way. And that's probably also one of the reasons you enjoy, coding, because data analysis is involvement of coding, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What's your
absolutely.
view about the process that's involved in programming?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. I think that's exactly what I like about it. But I think I'm not sure. I started out with Java at first. So Java was the first programming language that I learned. And there, the processes, or at least for me, was less rewarding because you don't have these little successes in between.
Okay.
Um, it's more like you're working on something, and then after a really long time, you get like a big success, like something major starts to work. But it's very hard to to replicate what you get from interactive programming languages like Python, where you can just write some lines of code and you can immediately you make slow incremental progress, which gives you like these little success hits every now and then.
Yeah. What is the difference between Java and Python fundamentally? Like, I haven't
Um,
worked with Java, so I have no clue about that.
have you worked with other more low level languages or medium level languages like C++?
I've worked with C++, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to that. I've personally not worked with C++ yet. I've worked with C, and I'm not good at it. But yeah, it's this sort of interactivity. I think you get you can test your code in smaller chunks, and you
Yeah.
get feedback all the time. I think for more abstract programs like in Java or in C, it's more difficult to replicate this kind of
Yeah.
yeah process.
So
Although
you
I
have
like
more,
programming in other languages too. Hmm?
yeah. So you have more built-in functions in Python, so it's also easier to implement, and that makes it quicker to, test an idea that you have been trying to test. In C++,
Yeah, yeah,
for example, I also in Java probably you'd have to write a, a bigger code. You have to write. There's no built-in function, so you have to write everything on your own. So
yeah,
that
yeah,
probably makes it. It's also. I mean, I enjoyed C++ for me, but I think yeah, the fact that you can do more things in less time in Python because of the open source nature and availability of built-in functions makes it really quick to test your ideas.
yeah. And sometimes it's almost like you're writing pseudocode, so you can just think
Yeah,
it and
yeah,
then immediately write it down. Yeah,
yeah, certainly. And for machine learning problems, I mean, it's not really a coding experience, I would say, because I mean, the lines of code that you write are just standard, and you just kind of do more of an experimentation of the parameters and all those things.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not, I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be comparable to a traditional coding experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think some people even wouldn't call it coding, and
Yeah,
I have no opinion on that. I think you could say it's coding or it's not coding, but
yeah.
yeah, definitely. although I have implemented some machine learning algorithms myself in Python just for practice during courses. But even that, I think, is much quicker than in yeah, a more low-level language or in medium-level languages like C.
Yeah. So you also talk about another programming language, Julia. I haven't really heard about that. And you claim that it's better than Python and other programming language, which might come off as controversial. So what is Julia, and why is it better?
Well, so I don't, maybe that's over the top. It's not better than other programming
Okay.
languages, but um, yeah, it's very similar to Python. So I needed like, I think it took me a day to get into it. Where usually I need some time to get into a new programming language. So
Okay.
getting from R to Python was quite difficult for me because it's very similar in many aspects, but then very different in other aspects, and I always mixed it up. But Julia is really, really similar to Python in terms of how you write it or the process of writing the code. But
Okay.
the cool thing about Julia is that it's about 30 times faster than Python. So the only thing that disrupts my work progress sometimes with Python is that I have to wait for the code to execute. So I execute a function and I know that I have to wait an hour until it has calculated everything. Where in Julia,
Okay.
I have built some simulation functions that would take ages in Python, and yeah, it was like,
So essentially, it's a quicker way of implementing, your code as compared to Python, for example.
yeah, in certain aspects. So I still think for machine learning, Python is really, yeah, unbeatable at
Is
the
the
time.
standard.
Yeah, with all the frameworks that you have, like scikit-learn or Keras and so on. Um, I think it's unbeatable at this moment. I also like the syntax of scikit-learn, for example. This is it's very intuitive to implement, and the functions also run really fast because I think, yeah, they have highly optimized functions that run underneath it, so you don't have the performance aspect so much. I like Julia more to if you're working on more experimental stuff where maybe there's not an implementation yet, so you have to uh, write something on your own. And it's really interesting because there are many new developments all the time. Like there are new packages all the time for really fundamental stuff. They're also working on deep learning stuff, which could be
Oh,
quite promising because obviously their performance is a factor as well. And I think
yeah.
for some reason, simulation is a very big topic there as well. For example, climate
So,
simulation.
okay. So for simulation purposes, you mostly prefer to use Julia over Python or other programming languages.
Yeah, I would say in like 9 out of 10 cases, I would choose Julia over any other language there.
Okay. So just a quick question about comparison between, the between programming in general and the way programming is done via machine learning. So what do you think is the difference between conventional programming and machine learning fundamentally?
Do you mean in terms like conceptually or?
Yeah, conceptually. So given a problem, uh, what are the aspects of it that given a problem, how do you approach it uh, from a conventional programming standpoint and from a machine learning standpoint? Because in machine learning, you don't you just feed lots of data, lots of input and output, and try to derive a relation between it. And so what in your view is the difference between machine learning and conventional programming?
Well, so I think with conventional programming, if I understand the question right, it's more of a deterministic solution to a problem. So mm, yeah, you have to formalize everything and develop an algorithm to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about machine learning is that you're learning from experience, sort of. And I think in many cases you can achieve much better performance through a machine learning algorithm than through a deterministic algorithm. Which is also, I think it comes with some risks as well. If you look at recommender systems, which is kind of it's a very popular approach for machine learning, and or a popular problem actually. Like if you had to hard code this would be nearly impossible. But it's also you have to consider a lot of things when you only let the algorithm learn from data.
Yeah, so I think that's like really precisely put. So the difference would come at the deterministic nature of the conventional programming. So you have to write a set of rules, but machine learning figures out those sets of rules on its own. So
Yeah.
that's concisely put, I would say. And I mean, I would also want to know about what agent-based modeling is. So how would you describe it in the most simplest way possible?
Okay, so I think the major aspect of it, to reiterate, is that you model sort of emergent phenomena, which is phenomena that you can't observe on a micro level of a system, but on the macro level of the system. And I was talking about the Game of Life by John Conway, which is a cellular automaton which has been discovered in the 70s, and I think it's the most stunning example of an emergent phenomenon, because you define a very simple set of rules and you get like arbitrary complexity on the system level. I'm not sure if you have ever seen like videos of it.
Yeah, I was just looking through the cellular automata videos yesterday, but just to give a basic idea, could you also try to explain it in words? I know it would be a bit difficult, but
It's it's actually really difficult to convey how fascinating it is with words, because it's such a
yeah,
visual topic. But
I'll add a link to the to one of the animations in the
that would be
description.
perfect, because it's absolutely mesmerizing. I think it's super exciting stuff.
So, but
And
what is the importance of it? What is the utility of cellular automation? If you can talk about that.
so for me, like as it pertains to agent-based modeling, it's a great example of this emergent property. So what you have
Okay.
is like a two-dimensional grid of squares,
Yeah.
and each one is either dead or alive, which is usually black or white, or colored black or white. And then, given the neighborhood, it decides if it's still alive in the next generation, or if it dies, or if it comes to life, if it's a dead cell at the moment. And the Game of Life is a special cellular automaton where any cell that has 2 or 3 neighbors and is alive stays alive, and any cell that has exactly 3, or that's dead and has exactly 3 neighbors, comes to life.
Oh, okay.
And
So,
hmm?
so, so whether a cell would survive or not depends on the number of neighbors that it has.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So,
it's
and yeah, so what is exactly what is one application of it, for example, in one of the systems that you have been working on?
So it doesn't really have a lot of applications in my domain, but
Okay.
for me it serves well as an example, because you have those 2 rules that I just described, which are very simple, obviously, but what you get is like incredible patterns over the screen of your grid of cells. For example, there are some structures that produce so-called gliders, which is like
Okay.
structures of cells crossing the screen in a direction. So it's fascinating how the automaton or information travels from one place to the next, and it's still the same information after that. And there's just a whole lot of structures to be discovered. There are also some oscillating structures which switch on and off sort of, or switch between different states. You really have to see it. I think you have to put a link for your listeners into the comment section. But yeah, basically,
Yeah.
phenomena like this are very common in social systems as well. So one example would be one early example, which is very famous in agent-based modeling, is called the Schelling model of segregation, which is a model by I think I don't know, military or social scientist from the United States from the 70s, and he modeled like segregation between people of different ethnicities in urban areas, and it's quite similar to the cellular automata as well, and Game of Life. And each agent on the field has like only two rules, I think, or only one rule. I think if the fraction of alike agents and different agents is higher than a certain threshold, then it will stay in its place. And when like there are too many different agents in the vicinity that are different from the agent itself, it will relocate to another cell. And after a sufficient amount of simulation steps, you can see like when they start randomly distributed on a grid, after a sufficient amount of iterations, they will just cluster into ghettos, if you will, or they will cluster into clusters of similar agents.
Okay. So yeah, that's quite interesting and a new thing that I didn't really know about. Also, I saw one of the videos where you shared, I think, this particular concept.
Yeah. I think I
Yeah,
talked
I'll
about
also add the link to your video because that's a really clear explanation of what you're trying to say with the visual stuff, which I cannot share right now. So yeah,
yeah,
so
but if anyone wants to check it out, make sure you check out other videos and other visualizations as well, because mine was sort of a little. I had to improvise a little bit, and I think there are better visualizations out there as well.
yeah, I mean, but still, it was a pretty good explanation. So, I mean,
Thanks.
I'd ask you for relevant links, and I'll just add it in the description. So, yeah, so you talk about segregating people on the basis of similarity in ethnicities. So, how do you define? So, what are the parameters of similarities? For example, when you're considering the agents of different ethnicities, if I've understood it wrong. So, what are the
Yeah.
parameters by which you define whether two agents are similar or dissimilar?
So this is really contingent on what kind of model you're building in the
Okay.
Schelling model, and this is also maybe I've chosen the wrong direction to explain it, but in the Schelling model there are in the simplest version you just give you have you have a square grid, and each
Yeah,
cell
I
has
understand how hard it can be
yeah
to explain.
it's so visual, it's really hard to get it's really hard to grasp what someone else sees when you explains it, but
Yeah. Let's skip this. I mean, I'll just add a few visualizations in the
yeah, that would be
description.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It can get really complicated real quick.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you have a square grid or a square lattice, and each cell has one of two colors. Let's say green and yellow, for example. And the way that each agent determines if another agent is the same or different is just seeing if it's green or yellow.
Okay.
So, for example, if you choose one particular cell on the grid, then you determine its Moore neighborhood, so all the cells that are like immediately adjacent to it, including the diagonal cells, and you calculate the fraction of green to yellow agents. And each agent has you have a global threshold of when agents are happy or not. So, for example, you say if less than 55% of the agents in the neighborhood are the same as the agent itself, then the agent will relocate.
Okay. So
And what
that's a very simplified
I think that's the
example
most
that you.
simple, the simple version of the model. There are more complicated ones, but that's the basic one. And you can play with this threshold. And there is like one specific point where if that's the threshold, then everything gets segregated. And under
Okay.
a different threshold, everything stays like in an equilibrium.
Okay. Yeah, and also you talked about simulating social systems. Does agent-based modeling play a role in that? What's the connection between these two things?
So that's actually the focus of much of what we do. So we sometimes try, or we oftentimes try to model online social media systems. Like,
Yeah.
for example, you base it on some sort of a graph generating algorithm. Like there's like, I don't know, have you heard of any graph generating algorithms so far? Or have you any knowledge of that?
So graph nets and all those things, if you're talking about.
Yeah, what I mean are models like the Barabasi-Albert model or the
No,
Watt-Strugatz model.
no clue.
Yeah, it's so all of those graph generating algorithms, they generate networks after a certain set of rules. For example, the earliest ones were just random networks. So you just threw a bunch of nodes in there, and then with a certain probability, you add an edge between two nodes, which gives you like a set of or a class of graphs. But they became more sophisticated over time, and you have different parameters that you can tweak. And yeah, a modern example I would say is the Barabasi-Albert graph, which captures this property of human connections, that there are people with different amounts of influence, for example. So there are, on YouTube, for example, you have a very small fraction of channels that have almost all the subscribers.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, PewDiePie and this Indian music channel, I think, which have like 100 million subscribers or so. And then there's like a steep fall to the next, and then another steep fall. And then you have a lot of channels with 1 million subscribers. And yeah, almost all other channels have 0 subscribers. And this is like an exponential distribution. So you have hubs in network, or in this network terminology, they are called hubs. And the Barabasi-Albert model is a graph generating algorithm, which provides networks that sort of support this property of real world networks. And we used it and other graph generating algorithms to simulate social media interactions. So we modified the model a little bit, and then we put agents on each node of the network, if you will. And those agents have a very they have a very simple decision-making model, and they post tweets, for example. So we let them communicate through the network, and we see what different parameters do. So one of our target variables, for example, is opinion. So each agent has an opinion, and each tweet that or each post that they send out to other agents has or represents this opinion. And then we see how they interact with each other. If we can see also polarization phenomena, and so on. And
So
go
yeah,
ahead.
continue.
Yeah, it's so what you get when you do that is you generate a potential explanation for the phenomena that you can see. So, for example, polarization of opinions would be the phenomenon that we want to explain. And we are sort of creating mechanics on the individual level. So we develop models of how agents make decisions and change their opinions, for example. And then we let them interact in this virtual simulation. And we see if we can recreate this global phenomenon that we observe in the real world. And so when you have successfully done that, it's still not sure that you have found the actual mechanic that underlies it, but you have found a candidate for it, and then you also can generate hypotheses that can be proven empirically, for example.
Okay. So, what is one interesting conclusion that you know derive from this thing, or one interesting result, I would say, or an observation would be a better word.
Um, Good question. Do you mean from our project so far, or any?
Yeah, from this yeah, social media project. Yeah.
So it's quite easy to generate dynamics which produce this polarization effect. So, for example, we examined one thing where agents broke off their connections with other agents if they became too dissimilar, and they randomly connected with other agents, and then of course it was we very quickly observed these polarization phenomena where agents grouped together in groups of like-minded agents or converged on an opinion. But one thing that we learned the hard way is also that you have to keep your model simple, because if you have too many parameters, then there's an explosion of complexity. So you have to search for a long time. So I think we haven't really, there's not like a big thing that we have discovered yet, but it's an incremental process. So we are playing around with parameters, and I think so. One current project that we are working on is we try to replicate another model, which is also a model of polarization, sort of. And we introduce, so the model already works. It has been published in, I think, 97. It's the model that I explained in that video that you talked about. It's called the Dissemination of Culture by Robert
Yeah.
Axelrod.
Exactly.
And what we do is we introduce, so first of all, we don't do it on a square lattice, the way that Robert Axelrod did, but we base it on some graph, like a Watt-Strugart's network or a Barber-Bassi-Alpert network. And then we also introduce some malicious agents, which could be seen as some, for example, social bots. So they have a constant opinion and they will only post their opinion. And we see, so what we want to see is if even a small fraction of these agents can have a big impact on the entire system. For example, on Twitter, it has been always a contentious issue if there are like social bots that convey a certain set of values and messages and then influence behavior and opinion.
Yeah. So also these models are, how simplistic or close to reality are these models? So I'm assuming they would be really simplistic, because you also mentioned that they can get really complicated if you try to include a lot of parameters there.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like it's a blessing and a curse, because I think you have to search for the right combination of parameters for a long time. So you have to try out a lot. And if you succeed in finding something interesting, like an emergent phenomenon that you can replicate with your model, then you're still not sure if you have actually found the right mechanic. But usually, so there are different approaches, I think. So there are also people who feed empirical data into models, and then so for example, do you know the Big Five personality model?
Um, what is it?
It's a feature model of personality where each person has 5 big dimensions of personality, which are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Is it
um,
related to the INTJ types and all those things?
no, actually, but it's very similar.
Okay.
Also a personality model, but this INTJ is, I think it's a, is it the, I think it's the Myers-Briggs model. This
Yeah,
INTJ
exactly.
model, yeah. And there people are they are categorized into types. But in the Big Five model, each person is described along 5 dimensions of personality. So you don't
Okay.
have types, but you have like a certain set of values for every person. So for example, you could be you could be in the 80th percentile of openness, which means that you are more open than 80% of the other people, and it becomes a distribution sort of. And that way, you can also transform it into a score. For example, a score between 0 and 1 if you transform it, and then you can for example survey empirical data and give each agent like one of the personalities that you surveyed. And then each agent has a different set of rules how it acts according to the personality that it was given. So you can use empirical data to simulate something. But the point that I was trying to make is that some people go really complex with that. So they put in lots and lots of empirical data into the model to see if they can model a real world phenomenon. But I'm really torn on that because I think there is something to that. So you want to generate an artificial society, and you obviously want to have it close to reality. But there's also a downside to that, because the more complex you make it, the less you can understand what's going on. So I think you have to find a middle ground where you find a mechanic that is simple enough to understand and which could also be real in a way, but which is not so complicated that you can't analyze it anymore.
So an agent, for example, would have a certain percentage of these 5 parameters, openness, extroversion, and all these things. So, but so you generate these agents, you generate different random agents, right? So you give random values of each of these 5 parameters to different uh, random agents, if I may say it that way. And then how do you make them interact? I mean, what do you mean by interaction of these agents? And what are the rules that you're talking about?
So, for example, in the Schelling model, the interaction would be with the neighborhood. Like each
Okay.
agent interacts with the neighborhood by determining how many are the same and how many are different, and then
Okay.
the behavior is that it relocates when a certain threshold is hit.
Okay. Okay.
But it can be much more complex than that. It really depends on the. So, for example, in this social media simulation that we had agents post stuff. So they would post something that was representative of their opinion a little bit. So each post had an opinion, and then each agent also had a timeline, and they were checking their timeline all the time, which was so it was basically just an array of posts, and the agent went through it and determined how they perceive their outside world, like how the opinion is in general of their outside world. And then
Okay.
with that information, they made a certain decision, for example, who to unfollow, and how to adjust their own opinion and so on.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. That I mean, in a way, you're trying to simulate the real world, and as you mentioned, trying to create an artificial society just by trying to understand the dynamics of how the real social events or activities takes place. So, what do you think are the implications? For example, if this kind of a simulation becomes really uh, realistically accurate, what are the applications that it can impact, and what are the possibilities that this kind of a research offers?
So one implication of is to you can, for example, so now we are only trying to understand something, but you can also use it for decision making at some point when you can, for example, I'm currently working on a simulation for behavior in crisis situations, like the current COVID situation,
Yeah.
and at some point you might be able to use a model like that for decision making. So for example, you can say, I'm, as a policymaker, for example, you could say, I'm planning to do this and that policy, and you can throw it into the model, for example. You can give the agents the policy and see how the system develops. But this is very risky, I think. So you have to be very careful before you use a model like that for policy making, because there's a lot of uncertainty all the time, and it's not you have to be absolutely certain that your model depicts a certain thing, and even then you can't be really certain. So it informs decisions, so it can give an edge to a different a different action to be taken at a given point. But actually, I think I thought about something more funny or on a little bit out there when you talked about that, because I also, when I first got into it, I got really interested in this simulation theory. Like there is this, I think there was a paper, a philosophical paper in the early 2000s by Nick Bostrom, which argued that we are living in a simulation.
Yeah.
and yeah, it's really out there. I think it's not trying to argue that we're actually living in the Matrix, but it's a very fun thought experiment. And when I started to program these agent-based models, I was thinking like, oh, is that how it starts?
So do you think we are living in a simulation?
No, I don't actually. I think, so what we are doing, it's kind of going into that direction where we are trying to generate artificial societies of agents which interact, and we like you are sitting on your computer thinking like, dance my puppets. It's actually, I don't think it goes in the same direction, and I don't think we will ever be able to generate this kind of complexity. But what makes me curious is, for example, the game of life, actually, because that's for me the most stunning example of how much complexity can arise from a very small set of rules, simple rules at that, actually.
So the game of life is just a small part of cellular automata that you described, right?
Yeah.
So what are the implications of game of life?
So there are many very interesting implications. For example, you have structures like the gliders, the oscillators, and they have really crazy names. There are also structures that are called spaceship, and they are discovered, sort of. So you try different configurations of live cells, and you see how they play out. And you sometimes there is also a structure called puffer train, I think, which is like a structure that starts a different way, a certain way, and then it grows into one direction, leaving behind like a trail of other live cells that are stationary. And there is just so much complexity in that game, and the implication is that maybe nature works the same way, because when we, obviously that's not a proven concept, but if we look at nature, usually it becomes chaotic at a certain point. So the more closely you look at something, the more chaotic it becomes, and the more complicated it becomes to understand. And you don't think that you could possibly explain this behavior with a simple rule. But the conjecture behind that is that maybe nature works the same way. Maybe the fundamental rules of reality are also very simple, and they just give rise to such an incredible amount of complexity. If you're interested in that, you can also follow the research of Stephen Wolfram. Do you know Stephen Wolfram?
Yeah.
I think he's also the guy behind Wolfram Alpha, and yeah, he's actually a contentious figure, but really interesting. and I think he devoted a lot of research to that line of thinking.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've got a lot of links to share in the description, I think.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So you also mentioned that you are involved in scientometrics, if I have written it correctly.
Mhm.
What's this? What's scientometrics? And yeah.
So scientometrics is the science of scientific progress, or um, it's basically you try to apply science to scientific publications.
Okay.
So you
What do you
you
mean by that?
so the earliest works of that, I think, probably or some of the earliest works were by a guy called um, I think Alexandro de Soria Price or something like that, who's behind a law called the Price's law, which is similar to an exponential distribution. And it states that many, or for example, scientific progress, or no, not progress, scientific productivity is distributed exponentially. So there's like a small fraction of people who have all the citations, and then
Ah,
there's like a lot of people, or yeah, a lot of researchers that have zero citations.
I mean, isn't that everywhere and in every aspect? I mean, not just
Yeah, it's actually
scientific.
quite common. Yeah, I think
Isn't it
every
also called the 80-20 principle? So
yeah, that's right.
20% people have access to 80% of
Yeah,
resources.
exactly. And that applies also to scientific publications. So
Okay.
a very few select publications have almost all the citations. And this was a very early venture into this topic, and now it describes, or you can try to describe how scientific productivity works. And the way I got interested into it was, at first I used a tool called bibliometrics. So bibliometrics is very similar to scientometrics, but it's more, I think it's difficult to discern, but I think bibliometrics is even more focused on the publication itself. So, for example, you can build networks of people who worked on papers together, or you can build networks of
Okay.
people who have been cited alongside each other a lot of times, and so on. And from that tool, I started to wonder, there was one application that wasn't implemented in that tool. It was an R tool, an R library from the programming language R. And there was one functionality that I missed, which was a citation network, basically. So I wanted to assemble a large data set of publications from one of the databases like Web of Science or Scopus. And then I wanted to extract how everyone cited each other. So I tried to model it as a directed graph where there is an edge from one node, which each node is a publication, and then there is a directed edge to the paper it's cited by. And so
Okay.
I wanted to find, like, my initial idea was to call it canon mining, because I wanted to like apply a sort of data mining technique to find out what the canon of a field is, like a canon in terms of the literature that is everything is based on, for example. And my hypothesis was that this graph that I described, it's a directed acyclic graph, more or less. So it only flows in one direction, because obviously one paper can cite another, and this
Yeah.
can cite another, and that can cite the first one again. This is only in very few select cases where they were like parallel, or they were published at a very similar time, and they got preprints and then cited each other, for example. But that's actually very rare. So you have almost a directed acyclic graph. And my suspicion was that you can prune this graph, so iteratively remove less important edges, and then sort of find the spine of a field, like the most important works and how they relate to each other. And I implemented that in Python, and I have it. I think I have it on my RWTH GitLab account as a private project. I have to publish it at some point. But the really frustrating thing about it was that when I was almost done with my project, I Googled it for a little bit because I thought, well, it's kind of strange that no one has done that before. And then I found out that it had been done like 40 years ago.
Oh, really?
I found a paper which had really it had all the concepts that I had thought about, and they were like perfectly formalized in a way that I hadn't been able to formalize them. So after that, I adjusted my program to fit this paper, and it kind of works, but it doesn't work perfectly because it's really hard to extract this citation relation from the data.
So essentially, it's a way to organize the different publications and form a link with the publishers and create a structure of the whole vast network of publications to
Yeah, yeah,
essentially simplify and create some order in it.
yeah, definitely. That's also exactly what I intended it to be. So
Yeah.
I for a very short time I thought that it might be useful for research as well. So trying to determine like structures in the literature, but I think mostly it's going to be useful for researchers who are looking for kind of a understandable guide to the literature of their field. So
Yeah.
obviously you have to still compile your own data set through Scopus, Web of Science, or like a database for publications. But
Yeah.
it actually works only with Web of Science so far, to be honest, because that's the only one where I was able to extract this citation relation. But when you have compiled your data set, you can just plug it into my program, and then it will spill out like these main paths through the literature. And yeah, but yeah, so structurally it's already functional, but I haven't found a way to make it accessible. Like it's
Yeah.
really hard to visualize and make it feasible for everyday practice of researchers. So I think I need to learn another visualization framework. Do you know D3 by JavaScript?
Yeah. Nope.
It's a very powerful visualization library with which you can make more interactive graphs, including network graphs. And I think I will try to build like a framework where you can plug in the output data of my program so that you can get more insights into the structure.
Okay. Yeah. So what would that system be? I mean, if you if it worked ideally, what would that system be looking like? Because currently you say that even though you tried to implement the 40-year-old paper that you found, it still isn't perfect. But ideally, what it would be looking like. So what would the tool be looking like? So what I understand now from what you explain is that such a tool would be beneficial to the researchers. For example, you have to do lots of background research, and so
Mm-hmm.
it will make your process of uh, finding relevant papers a lot simpler.
Mm-hmm.
So what would the ideal tool look like? Do you think it would be like a search engine, and someone would be writing keywords, or how does that work? Ideally, I mean.
Okay. I don't know what it would be ideally. I think maybe you could put it into a workflow where it is like a search engine. But I think more of I'm not sure. I think the domain that it covers is too fuzzy that it can work as a sort of generic framework where everyone can just type in keywords and then get their results out. So my vision for it is that it's going to become a Python library, which I don't know if I will submit it to any PyPy or something like that. But I will definitely make it available on GitHub, so you can install it via pip, for example, and
Yeah.
then as a researcher you can just open a Jupyter notebook and then load your data set that you have compiled. And I've I've narrowed it down to a very simple workflow. So you have to just, I think 2 classes. You have to build models, and then only through a few functions, like I think 4 or 5 lines of code, you can get your results. But it's very inefficient so far. So I tried it with a data set of like, I think a little over 1,000 publications, and it calculated for like half an hour or so. So you have to be patient to wait for your results. But yeah, ideally you would just get like the result data out, and then you can plug this data into another component which gives you a nice visualization, maybe even interactive, where you can hover over certain nodes, and then you can see the digital object identifier with maybe a URL to the publication itself or something like that.
Interesting. I mean, the research activities that you have done, that you have shared so far, are quite interesting and unique. It's different to think from your point of view, because you have been involved in these kinds of projects, especially the simulation one. I think it's there's something to it. So moving on from research to more industrial experience. So tell me about your experience at Optimum. What's the name of the company exactly?
It's called Optinu. So
Optinu.
Opti
Okay.
and then NOO. Yeah. And they do cultural matching between employers and employees, basically.
Okay.
So I think I can't talk too much in depth about it, obviously, because I can't reveal what they do. Behind or I can't talk about everything there because of privacy reasons and so on.
So what's the rough idea, like what this company is about, and uh, what was the what was a project that you were involved in, and just a rough outline would be cool, I
So
think.
what they are doing is they actually, also for your listeners, if anyone is interested, I think they can try it out. So you can create an account there, and then you answer a few questions, and then you're matched against potential employers. So there are companies on the platform that also answered some questions about their company, and then you're matched against different companies, and you get a score which company fits you best. And they make it a point to not match according to hard skills, but more to like what makes you tick and your cultural background, for example. So do you like it more formal or more personal at work? Do you think your colleagues should also be your friends, or do you want to have a clear separation between work and your personal life? Where would you like to work? Like, are you open to work anywhere in Germany or even in another country, and so on? Like questions of that type. And so the core, I think, is this matching algorithm, which is quite complex. And my task was to assess how the data quality can be improved to achieve more precise and better matching scores, for example. So I was given access to the data to determine how well it is suited, and how, for example, one problem that I ran into was that there are, for example, multiple choice questions there, and it's really hard to come up with a method to match multiple choice questions. And I also did some analyses there, which that's something that I can't really talk about, because it's obviously it belongs to the company, so you can't say that. But the cool thing about it was that they let me just run with it. So I was able to go and explore everything myself, and then sort of create, or create my own infrastructure and see for myself how I can help best. Yeah. And it was it was also quite complicated. So I was really worried that I can't do something, but I think I managed to do okay.
So you talk about matching an employee with an employer. So what was your approach, or what are the different approaches that one can take to solve such kind of a problem? You don't have to go into specific details about your company, because I understand it's also
Mhm.
confidential. So, but you must have uh, research different kinds of methods, and just an overview of what are the ways one can approach this matching problem.
Yeah, so the simplest one would be, for example, if you have one item where you have just a scale from one side to the other. For example, a Likert scale, which is you get a certain statement and you have to choose how much you agree with that statement. So maybe you have also taken part in a survey of that kind where you had like
Yeah,
I don't know, I'm a very open person, and then I
yeah,
completely agree to I completely disagree, and then depending on your answer you get a score, for example, or you get maybe 4 questions for the same concept, in that case maybe openness, and then on aggregate your scores are aggregated, and then you get, for example, a score of, I don't know, 4.5 out of 6 or something like that, and that score can be, yeah, then just be matched to
okay,
the score of the
okay.
company. Obviously this openness example is not a very good example because, well, a company can't be open like it can't have a personality trait, but this would be like the simplest way. And in other cases it would be more of a set overlap, for example, like when you say only want to work in Munich, then obviously you're only going to be matched against companies that are that have outposts in Munich.
Okay. So, tell me about the involvement of machine learning in such a project, or did you do it in a conventional way? But I assume that there would be a lot of parameters to optimize in such a problem. So, what was the approach that you took? Was it a conventional programming approach or a machine learning approach, and uh, how it went basically?
I think I can't really reveal too much about their
Okay.
algorithm
Yeah.
because I think that's like the it's a really great algorithm,
Yeah.
um, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's quite confidential, so I don't want to risk
Okay. Okay.
revealing anything that I shouldn't. So,
Sure.
but
Sure.
I think for me it was more of an exploratory approach. So like clustering, I use clustering algorithms to sort of find patterns and see how some things can be optimized. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I understand the nature of confidentiality
Yeah,
that's
I'm sorry to be so
involved.
so
No problem. I mean, you can't reveal uh, the stuff that's confidential, right? Yeah. So yeah, what I also found interesting was that I'll move back a bit to the COVID-19 model that you talked about. So uh, yeah, it's right now the COVID-19 virus is there, and so what kind of implications do you think the agent-based modeling approach would bring forward? How could it be helpful? Because I think it's also your thesis right now.
Mm.
Yeah. So tell us about it.
So behaviors like social distancing or mask wearing, they have a very interesting trade-off where they come at a cost to yourself. For example, you have to wear your mask everywhere. You have to bring it. You can't forget it, and it's uncomfortable on your face. So it comes at a personal cost. But apparently, it only works if everyone does it.
Okay.
So my suspicion is that there are interesting dynamics underlying that. For example, when someone is very motivated to do it themselves, so they wear the mask all the time, but they see everyone else is not doing it. And I have also heard some people complain that they get like judgmental stares from people. So they go somewhere with a mask and everyone looks at them like, whoa, what's up with that person? So there's also a social pressure aspect to it. And I would be interested in, so obviously now it's obligatory. So everyone will adhere to it in supermarkets, or almost everyone. But on aggregate, so how likely will people adhere to these measures if they are prompted to do it voluntarily, and how much do they stick to it in situations where they are not observed, for example? And I think so. My idea is to create a model of that behavior, like try to find out different factors that that determine how well you perform the behavior. And they are obviously interactive as well, because you observe other agents and you see if they are wearing a mask, for example. And yeah, on aggregate, the better the people or the agents adopt this behavior, the more there's a dampening effect on, for example, an epidemic. And there is like there is a model for epidemiology, or an epidemiological model, which is called the SIR model, which is sorry, my throat is really sore.
Yeah, sure.
So SIR stands for susceptible, infected, and recovered or removed. And there are some extensions to the model as well, where you have exposed, for example, then you have a SEIR model, and it comes with all kinds of acronyms. It's really funny, actually. You have, I think I have already looked at 5 or 6 different types of model, which all come with a different variation of an acronym, which is SIRS, and yeah, different kinds of models. So, but it's a differential equation model. So it's a set of differential equations which describe the rates of people going from one state to the next. So, for example, in the most basic SIR model, people go from susceptible to infected, and from infected to removed or recovered. Removed because you also count the death, for example, or you could account for the death. Yeah, this model is not an agent-based model. It's a differential equation model, but I plan to include a parameter in it, which is this sort of dampening effect that I get from the agent-based model. So, for example, one dynamic that could occur is that people at first do the behavior very, very well, and then they slack off over time, and then the dampening effect reduces. So, for example, you could get a second wave of the infection or something like that. And I want to create a dynamic where the agent model feeds into the differential equation model, and the current state of the differential equation model, which I'm not going to solve as a differential equation, but rather simulate. These states will feed back into the agent-based model. And this is sort of my master's thesis right now, or my current idea for the modeling. And yeah, so I'm and what you can also do in the end, like what I found really cool, is that you can compare it to actual data, because there is like a plethora, difficult word, plethora of data about COVID-19 right now. There's like this John Hopkins University data set, and there is also for Germany there are data sets, open data sets from the Robert Koch Institute. So you can compare it to empirical data very easily. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And also you mentioned that the implications of such a project can go in the wrong direction if it's not accurate. So what you plan to do is to keep it theoretical, the entire thesis topic, right?
Yeah, for now. So yeah, it's pretty theoretical. Um, but yeah, I I'm not sure what the implications of it will be, and I tend to be really careful in what I can really say about what's going on after that, because you never know what's so it's it's only as strong as the assumptions that you make about it. And I think what it's mostly going to be generating is hypotheses about what motivates people to adopt a certain behavior, like mask wearing, for example. So if I can reproduce dynamics that are close to reality, then I think you can um, yeah, you can falsify it using the hypotheses that were generated, or if you turn the assumptions of the model into hypotheses, you can empirically validate them, and then you can see how accurate the model might be. And from that, I think you could, for example, get some insights into which measures make sense at which point of an epidemic. For example, does it make sense to early on prompt people to wear masks, or does it make more sense to say that social distancing is important? And yeah, at what point do you have to implement which measure? This would be the ideal case. Obviously, it's open-ended. Like it's not clear what's going to be the result of it, but that's my hope for it.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, if you build such a platform, or I mean, I don't know if I can call it platform, but I mean, ideally, if you succeed, if you implement this topic successfully, it could have really major impact. It could be really helpful as well.
Mm.
And are there other research topics related to this already existing, or is it something that you came up with originally, uh, talking
Uh,
about this idea?
so actually, we are. I'm not sure if I can talk about the project specifically so far, but we are involved in a project which is a large scale European effort to make or to model the epidemic and to gain insight into policy making, like what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and so on. So there is a related research project, which is, I think, kind of the one of the biggest organizationally that I've ever been involved in. And yeah, so there are a lot of related models, also from very diverse fields, like actual epidemiology, and
Yeah.
I think there are. I have to check what people are also involved in that, but from a very very wide range of disciplines. Yeah, and this kind of dynamic was, I think, obviously I'm inspired by what I read, so I have read some similar approaches, but I think that's something that hasn't really been done in that way before. But I mean, I'm still looking in, or I'm still venturing into the literature,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
might
yeah,
come across
exactly.
something very similar at some point.
Yeah. So I think we got a bit too deep into the technical aspect, and now I think it's time that we move on to a bit more personal and also philosophical aspect. So the Johannes that I know of is really into hard work and spending long hours working on his projects. It wouldn't be wrong to call you a workaholic. My question to you is, what inspires or motivates you to keep working hard and keep pushing yourself?
Yeah, so to reiterate, I a few years back I started to really work on data science and data analysis stuff, and from that I sort of found what my passion was. Like I see data science and all the tools that come with it, like the basic machine learning algorithms, and yeah, a certain level of expertise in a language like Python or R or Julia. I see that as a great toolkit to do very meaningful things, because it's just so useful right away. Like you can do something really, really useful with it from a very early point on. So, yeah, and it sort of rewards you with tangible results right away. And for me, that's always the yeah, what motivates me to go forward, because every time I get frustrated, there's like this little hit when you have a little success and you make some progress. And also, I think I want to. So for me, it's very important to work on something that has a lot of meaning to me or that I'm passionate about, because I don't know, like when I have to work on something that I mean, obviously not everything that I do is meaningful and I'm passionate about it all the time, because there are like some tasks that are not very fun, but that's a given, like that you can't
Yeah,
work on your bliss all the time, and
exactly.
but overall I think it's very important to me that it makes sense, or that what I'm doing gives meaning to my own life. And if it gives meaning to me, then I don't really have to motivate myself anyway. So I will just keep working all the time. And um, I've tried to go about this methodologically. So I try to come up with a framework for myself when I work and how long, and but usually
Okay.
so I can plan for a little bit, but there are phases where I can just not predict when I'm going to be in the state which I'm required to be creative, for example. So sometimes um, I'll be kind of unproductive for a time, and then from 5 p.m. to midnight, I will just continuously work without any breaks, because I'm in the zone. And
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
So working deeply on a task for 5 years, 5 hours straight, or gaps in between.
well, I'm actually, it's hard to say sometimes, to observe
Yeah.
yourself. I mean, you know it for sure. Like sometimes you get so deep into a task, then you look at
Yeah.
your watch, and it's suddenly it's 2 hours later or 3 hours later. And I mean, sometimes you get up and you move around for a little bit, or you do something else, and then you get back to the task. But I think when you get really deep into one task, it's difficult to make breaks that are too long, because then you get out of your zone, and it's hard to
Yeah.
get back in. But
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, and I think there are also some tasks that require that you work on it for like 7 hours straight, because they are so complex that you need some time to get into them. So it takes you maybe an hour to get accustomed to working on it. And then when you're in the zone and you get out of the zone again, you need another hour to get back into it. So it's very important not to break this flow of work. So yeah, that's what motivates me to work intensely on one thing at a time. That doesn't sound good.
Yeah, so you're someone who derives lots of meaning and purpose from work, right? So, what importance do you think work holds in society? Because not everyone would be deriving purpose from work. Most of the people, I think a vast majority of people, would think of work as a means to earn money, right? To, earn a living. So, what do you think is the importance of work in society? And yeah, what's your take on this thing?
Yeah, so I think I think work is usually, when you're an adult, it will be like 60% of your week. So I think
Yeah,
just from a selfish standpoint, like from your own point of view, I think it's very important that it's not something that's terrible to you. But I've I think it's also a mistake to judge people too hard if they are not they don't like their work, or they don't pursue something that is meaningful to them, because I think there are different types I think for many people, it's just the right thing to do something repetitive, for example, or and those tasks. I think it's also a matter of personality. So what job fits you, and yeah, for some people, it's just good to do something repetitive, which is even if it's not very interesting. For some people, it's more important to be around other people a lot. I mean, you and I, we are more like I mean, I don't want to work alone all the time, but I also like to work alone. Like I work,
Yeah.
I like sometimes to be left alone for 5 hours and just code. And I also enjoy having conversations with people, and I also enjoy, for example, presenting in front of an audience. But you find your type of work that fits you, and I think it's a very important part of your life, especially because you do it in your best years,
Yeah.
basically, and you do it for so much of your week. But then also on a larger scope, I think it's also, or what gives you meaning a lot is that if you keep in mind a bigger picture, like if you pursue a higher purpose, like something that sounds a little dramatic, but
Let's go down that road.
yeah, I think it's important that you have like you have the feeling that you're doing something meaningful also for other people. I think that's what you can derive the most meaning from, and it's a constant challenge, because I think sometimes it happens to everyone that you think, well, what I'm doing is not really helpful to anyone, or and then you have to steer it back into a direction where you have the feeling that it's a good thing. Like it's better that it exists than when it wouldn't exist. And yeah,
Yeah. So, so you're someone who thinks about who has a long-term vision and kind of tries to bring meaning into his work based on a larger vision that you have developed. So, also you mentioned that for some people, probably the repetitive things would be the right option. What do you mean by that?
um so for example, I is that a good example? For example, if you are working as an administrator somewhere, then your work will be repetitive in a way. Like you always have to follow certain processes that stay the same for everyone. For example, if your job is to process students, then you follow a certain set of rules that apply to every student, and you have to create a paper trail for the student, and then file it in the right way. And I think that would be something that would be very suited to someone who's really orderly. So someone who's wait, I think I have my WhatsApp open in the background, and I'll just close it. Sorry, because I just heard the sound. So someone who's very neat in their work, that could be something that they could derive meaning from, because administration obviously is also a very important job. It's automated away in a way, uh, in some aspects, but there are still some administrative tasks that are still quite repetitive, and I think some people can find meaning in that job as well, or it can suit some people and they can be happy in that job. And I think it's, yeah, I try not to be judgmental about anything. I think when I first started off putting so much emphasis on my work, I thought sort of I put the same emphasis on it for other people, so I became a little bit judgmental. But
Okay.
yeah, it's also very important to maintain a balance with your private life as well, which I for sometimes didn't do. So I was just such a maniac that I was working all the time, and
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't maintain this balance very well for a time. So I dialed back on that a little bit, and also try to balance that out well. Yeah, and everyone is doing sort of what they are doing. So
Yeah. So, so you talk about uh, one type of person who might derive lots of meaning from doing repetitive tasks. For example, bringing order to any activity that allows him to bring order from chaos, for instance. But then these are essentially the kind of activities, tasks, or work positions that are most likely to get replaced in the future uh, because of the advent of technology. So how do you think people would be deriving meaning from their life if they do not really have their job to get meaning from?
That's a very difficult question, I think. So I'm not set on a specific answer to that. I think I listen to many people who talk about that. I think the most prominent recent example is Andrew Yang, this candidate for the American presidency from the Democrats, who I found quite compelling. Like, I think he would have been a good choice probably, um, but I'm not sure if he's right. I think his approach was that automation will kill a lot of jobs, and we have to provide basic security to people who will lose their jobs in the near future. So, but I'm actually not sure if we will ever run out of work. So it's unclear to me if technology will really start to encroach so much on what humans do that people will go out of work. I think that danger might be blown out of proportion a little bit. I mean, obviously, some jobs are going to be automated away, and some people are even talking about laws to stop automation and progress in robotics to maintain people's jobs, which I think is also not a very good solution, because in the end you can't
That's
stop progress. Like,
Yeah, that's hindering the progress, which is doing
mm,
nobody good.
yeah, and I think people will just come up with more jobs. And I just recently listened to, I think, a bit of, I think it was Naval Ravikant. I think he's a American investor personality. I don't know much about him. It was just on a podcast, and he talked about that people are going to be freed up to do more for fulfilling things. Like, the creative jobs are the ones that will remain in the end, because we are very far away from general artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
Um, so we don't really have machines that observe the real world and come up with new things. It's more like a pattern recognition and clustering, and yeah, basically pattern recognition is you can reduce many things down to pattern recognition in modern AI. So yeah, it's very hard to come up, or I think it will take a long time before machines get creative and autonomous in a way.
yeah,
Um, so I think it at least it will take a long time before we run out of work. But what's worrying a little bit is that, mm, yeah, I think maybe a creative job might not be for everyone. So I'm not even sure if I'm not sure if a really creative job would be something for me, like something where, for example, it would way well artists. I think we will never run out of artists, because there's always, it's almost inherently about human expression. So even if it can be replicated well by machines, I don't think we will. Yeah, the kind of novelty that we derive from art will always remain relevant. But yeah, even other creative endeavors, I think, are not for everyone, and
yeah,
so maybe that's going to be a problem when all the repetitive jobs are going to be automated. Then it might be a problem that some people just don't find something that suits them.
yeah. It's actually a discussion with no end because nobody knows the answer to such a problem, right? It's
Yeah,
it's it's kind of based on a set of assumptions and hypotheses that we are trying to make here. What I think is that when so let's suppose that we reach such a stage where people don't have to work to earn a living. So this concept of universal basic income, let's say it has been implemented. I mean, maybe in a very distant future when you don't really need to do any trivial tasks at all. Maybe there are significant advancements in robotics and AI, for instance. So at
Mm.
that point, it becomes really a challenge for people to derive meaning anything in life, and it also comes down to if we think about it, in various countries we already the government provides the monetary support for people who are jobless, and you see that these people kind of misuse this facility to certain extent, and they kind of intoxicate themselves, and so they certainly lost meaning because they do not really have to work, and
Mm.
some people might argue that okay, you don't have to work, you don't have to do the repetitive tasks, and then you might have the freedom to do what you want, and participate in more creative endeavors. But does everybody want to do that? That's the question. Like you mentioned that a creative job might not be for everybody, so it's really something that can be a challenging thing to talk about.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And yeah, that's exactly the symptom of it, I think. I think the economic aspect of it is only one aspect. So obviously you have to feed yourself and your family, for example, but um, I think many people who live on governmental support are miserable because they have no meaning or no function. Like they don't have something that
Yeah,
they do that they perceive as meaningful. I think that's a big problem that also has to be solved.
certainly. And you talk about having a vision for yourself and having a purpose which motivates you to work harder every day because you kind of get a sense of contribution to the society or the place you work at. So uh, I'm getting a bit too deep into philosophy now, but I'll still ask it. So what do you think
Mhm.
is the purpose of life?
Oh, so the
Since we touched the topic, let's go a bit
yeah, yeah,
deeper
yeah,
as well.
yeah. Let's go ahead. That's very difficult to say, actually. I think the meaning, obviously, it's something different for everyone. Like if if you look at it from a backwards angle, and you look at people who you think have a very meaningful life, I think it's mostly people who are constantly progressing towards something.
Hmm.
Um, for example, like the best example I think for it would be Elon Musk, who sets himself like almost unattainable goals, and
Yeah,
then he's constantly working towards those goals. And I think allegedly, like or from interviews, I think he always talks about how he works for like 100 hours a week, and you can't maintain this level of work when you don't have a extraordinary strong vision for yourself. It must be really
yeah,
meaningful as well.
yeah.
Um,
It certainly is for Elon Musk, right? I mean,
yeah,
he has a vision for the whole world, so for the whole of humanity. So it definitely gives him a lot of meaning.
yeah, yeah. And actually, I tried working that hard for some time. For 2 weeks during my bachelor's thesis, I worked for
You
over
mean
100 hours.
100 hours, really?
Two weeks long. After that, I had to
Okay,
recover for a month. It was
really.
really crazy. Yeah.
What was it like?
It was actually, I felt kind of great during it, because I felt so like there was a sense of self-efficacy. When you get so much done in so little time.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
problem was I had to finish my bachelor's thesis and another student paper at the same time. So I figured like, holy crap! Oh sorry, I didn't want to swear on your podcast, but uh,
That's allowed, no problem.
Okay, cool. I thought, yeah, I have to get going. So I made a plan for myself, and I got up every day at 5 p.m., 5 a.m., not 5 p.m.,
Yeah, yeah.
5 a.m., and I started working at 6. And I only made breaks for half an hour for my meals. And I worked until 10 p.m., like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day,
Damn
uh,
it.
and also Saturday and Sunday. And
Really?
I think my student paper, I wrote like an entire statistical analysis plus 9 pages of text or so in one day, like within 24 hours. That was like the craziest work session I had, I think.
Yeah,
Mm.
it sounds really
But
crazy,
it was, yeah. During the time, it felt really good, but afterwards, I was just completely exhausted.
What do you mean by meaning exactly? So when you talk about deriving meaning from your work, what exactly is the meaning of meaning?
Complicated. I think,
Because
yeah, I think
because
it's
then
the
when we
sense of moving towards something. Ha, it's quite funny. I always try to, or I catch myself trying to explain it with itself, like a circular argument. But I think the sense of moving towards something that you perceive as good is maybe what is giving it meaning. So, for example, do you know the Ocean Cleanup Project?
yeah, probably so a bunch of guys who are trying to clean up the ocean and they have kind of created a movement of some sort. Uh,
Yeah, they created a non-profit,
okay.
and the founder is a guy called Bojan Slat, which I found really fascinating. He's a um, yeah, I think when he was 16 or something, he came up with this vision to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch,
Okay.
and he's now dispatched his whole first system that actually catches garbage in the Pacific, and he has this goal of, I think, cleaning up the entire Pacific until 2050 or something like that.
Oh,
And that is up is like that's I bring that up as an example because I think it's quite simple to perceive that as something like really really good. Like would be fantastic if that would work in that time. And I can just imagine how much meaning he or
yeah.
the entire team of that project derives from moving towards that goal every day and making progress in that sense. I think that's maybe a good way to describe what I mean by moving towards something
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Yeah. So when you talk about meaning, you talk about a sense of direction towards approaching a goal and progressing continuously towards it. And a lot of people uh, derive meaning from that as well. I mean, if you talk about Kobe Bryant or sports persons, definitely they derive a sense of meaning from this kind of a thing. But then there are people like, for example, the guy who started the Ocean Project, or Elon Musk, who apart from progressing towards a particular goal, also might think about having an impact on the society in general and realizing a vision that's actually greater than themselves. So what part of meaning does that involve?
I think, yeah, I think it doesn't have to be something as big. Like,
Okay.
I think also, I mean, I can only guess what many people derive a lot of meaning from is, for example, raising their kids
Yeah.
and having a family, for example, and doing something for the family. So it doesn't have to be like an overarching vision. Actually, I think it can be quite hurtful if it's too big of a vision because, yeah, I think not everyone is an Elon Musk, so not
Yeah,
everyone should
exactly.
have like such a big vision, um, because yeah, you I think you have to stay in your area of competence. It has to be something that is actually realistic, what you can do. And
Yeah.
I think it's not bad to think big and think about something big, but you have to be willing to adjust your outlook to something that's realistic for you. So yeah, I think it's a little bit about humility as well,
Yeah.
because if you're starting, I think in the age of social media, because it's so easy to reach everyone. Like you're potentially interfaced with every other person on the platform. So
Yeah.
it's easy to think of yourself as someone who's like an influencer or someone who has a lot of, or the goal becomes to have like an impact on society at large. But I think it's more important to focus on something that's in your circle of competence and around you in your direct vicinity. So, and I think it's more conducive to giving you meaning, because you can observe much more directly what you're doing and how you're progressing to what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, it depends on the person in what form he, derives his meaning from. So it's essentially, specific to the person. So what might be meaningful for one person would not make sense for another person. So for some person, the priorities would be, raising a good family, as you mentioned,
Yeah,
and for
and
another
that's
person,
perfectly valid in my opinion. Like
yeah,
that's a if that's something that gives someone meaning, it's and I think I can see myself in that position as well, at some point in the future. So yeah.
yeah, interesting and quite deep, to be honest. Yeah. So now switching a bit from meaning and setting goals and aspirations and all those things to essentially becoming better at your craft by means of learning from other people. So what do you think is the role of a mentor, or how important do you think is having a role model in your journey of becoming good at something? For example, for you it might be your research, or at data analysis. Who is your role model?
Yeah, so I have sort of so many role models that it's difficult to say who really is it. Like I I I get inspired very quickly, and I sort of, I mean, that happens to many people, I guess. It's that inspiration becomes sort of like a consumption good. So you just get
Yeah.
inspired all the time, but you don't act on it often enough. So in my direct circles, like in my work, there's like the leader of our research group. He has taught me a lot of things. Like and I think that's also, it's very valuable to have someone in your direct environment, like not a figure that you follow, like a public figure or something, but there is someone in your direct environment who you can turn to for advice, for example. And yeah, he's doing a really great job on yeah, he gives us a lot of tutelage, so he gives us a lot of tutorials on how to do things. For my bachelor's thesis, he took, I think, once he took 3 hours to teach me R.
Okay.
And that was really that impressed me a lot, because it was extraordinarily helpful, and I wasn't expecting that, because obviously you don't expect that someone puts in so much work into helping you. And yeah, he's also giving us a lot of freedom to explore. So he's not just giving us tasks to do, but he's giving us a lot of freedom to develop our skills. And I'm I'm an autodidact. Is that an English word as well? I learn on myself a lot. So I do self study. I don't know what's the English word for it.
Autodidactic.
Yeah, something like that. It didn't sound really English, but I guess that's the word for it. So I like yeah, learning from books or from online resources like massive open online courses, something like that. And even, I mean, there's some great educational content on YouTube and platforms like blogs and so on. So I like learning from those resources as well. But it's good to have like people to talk to about it and people to develop something with, so that you can apply it immediately.
Yeah. Uh, I'll take this keyword learning from what you talk about. You said that you like to learn things on your own. So, taking, a different trajectory to the conversation that we were having. So, uh, how do you think the current education system is uh, flawed, or is it totally perfect? What is your opinion of the current way of teaching in the institutes or universities? Just a general opinion or outlook.
Do you mean higher level education or also
I
schools?
mean, generally, I mean, even you can talk about schools or university level or technical.
Yeah, yeah.
What's your view about this?
Um, so I think it's definitely flawed in many ways. So when I remember school, I think at about in 11th grade or so, I didn't really had the feeling that I was learning so much more, which I couldn't have learned on my own as well. And many of the classes felt like a waste of time in a way. But it's also, for example, I think in math class I learned a lot, and also in language classes it was really helpful. And I also, yeah, obviously you sometimes have teachers that you like and that you don't like. So, but I think the general premise of classes is very inappropriate for people in their teenage years. Like you sit down for 6 hours or 7 hours and have to listen to someone essentially. In some cases, sometimes you're also prompted to discuss something, but those class discussions are always very artificial, and you don't really develop an idea in that. Um, but there are some things that work well and some things that don't. So I think one thing that I'm really critical about is that people don't really learn to write in school. At least in Germany, I don't know where it is, how it is in other countries, but I certainly have learned writing on my own. Like in school, we always had to write, and we weren't taught how to edit. So you had to, like, the tests were really, you had to come up with an essay on the spot, usually in German classes, so language classes. And you weren't really taught how to write. You were just expected to know how to. And in elementary school, we learned writing, and that was sort of it. So the teachers after that just expected that you know how to conceptualize a text, for example. And I think it's very important to also edit your thoughts a little bit. You can't just come up with a perfect text and only start writing when you have the perfect finish for your sentence. Sometimes you have to just write, and then you realize, I could formulate that a little differently. Then you cross it out and you rewrite it in another way. And the way that it's taught in school is really not very conducive to learning how to actually write. I'm not sure though how they do it today, because when I went to school, it wasn't that common that you had so many digital resources. So maybe now they have laptops for every student or something like that. And because editing is obviously more easy on a laptop than on with pen and paper.
So, what do you think can be improved in the way things are taught in school? You mentioned that the writing process is never really taught, and you are expected to uh, learn it, know it on your own, and you're just given tasks where you're expected to write naturally. And also, another idea that just comes to my mind right now is that everyone tells you to focus in school, like you should be focusing on your studies, and
Mm.
but you're never really taught how to focus. I think this one is from Dandapani. He's
Uh-huh.
a, I think a monk who gave a talk as well that went quite viral online.
Mhm.
So yeah, moving back to the question, what do you think can be improved in the schools?
So I think concerning writing, it's quite obvious for me that everyone should learn how to edit a text or conceptualize a text. So um, especially just writing an essay, like I think that was really, yeah, not well taught in my school at least. Although it wasn't terrible. I don't want to crap on my school too much because it was okay. I think the education that I got wasn't like terrible, but
Yeah,
I think writing is so powerful that it's such a powerful tool that everyone should be able to do it better. So because it's also a way of organizing your thoughts, and especially when you try to learn something, when you write a little essay about it, it's a way better way of learning it because you're actively engaging with the material. And I think in general, what I didn't like in university was when I had to cram like
yeah.
study things that are not very problem oriented. So I think that I make the quickest progress if someone gives me a problem and then I just give it all, or that I just throw myself against the problem and I try to solve it in many ways. Especially for if it's a programming problem or something that I can solve with programming, then especially I get into a flow. Like, of course, in the beginning, you can't, if you don't have the basics down, then you can't start working on the problem. But if you have the basics, for example, of a programming language, then you can choose a simple problem, and then just start solving it. And when
Yeah,
you get stuck, you can just Google it and find some advice on the internet, and then you understand how it works better.
yeah,
And I think the university courses that I liked most were the ones that had a very well structured exercise along with it. And that's also the thing. I think most courses are taught in reverse. Like you first have the lecture and then you have the exercise. So you get the theory first and
ah,
then you get the problem. I think it should be the other way around. You should first understand what the problem is and then you can follow the lecture much easier because you know what is being formalized. When you start from the symbolic layer, like mathematical symbols and like a terribly formalized theoretical concepts, then it's sometimes you don't even know what the problem is. Like, why has someone done that? And
yeah,
reversing this and first letting people explore the problem and then showing them the solution would probably be much more efficient and much more productive for most students. So
yeah.
that's what I
I
think would have enhanced
definitely,
university.
yeah, I definitely agree with the thing that you're talking about, and I like the idea uh, of the fact that things are taught in a reverse way. Although I didn't think of it in this particular way before, but it totally makes sense, right? Things are taught in a reverse way, so the exercises or the problem should be given first, and then you should probably also be given some time to solve it, and then to explore the problem on your own, to
Mm.
engage your creative self, and then you kind of have access to all the theoretical pieces of information, which probably also you don't need to access all of these. Only pick out the things that are relevant to the problem that you're solving.
Mm.
And for instance, for a subject like machine learning, if you're just bombarding a student with all the theoretical concepts in one go, and then after that you can also explore some of the things with exercise. Of course, it's not it's not a totally terrible way, but definitely I think a better way would be to, also give him exciting problems that he would be really interested in
Mm.
solving, and not a meaningless exercise. Sometimes the exercises are also meaningless, right?
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
the exercises also don't really make that sense, even though it might be a good activity. But if it doesn't, make sense to the student, then he wouldn't bring in that enthusiasm. So
yeah,
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 what I think is that if a set of uh, meaningful exercises are given first, like you mentioned, for the student to explore, and then he also has that, that bible of knowledge,
yeah.
like in a conventional fashion, then definitely it's a way better, way, more efficient method to learn.
Yeah, I had one course last semester which was kind of in that way, and two courses actually. They were by one of them was actually Introduction to Data Science, and there we had two larger assignments over the course of the semester, which sort of were hands-on machine learning data science tasks, and these were handed out like in advance, so you had the problems and you could look into them and try to solve them, and the lecture sort of went along with that. So the professor covered the topics from the exercise step by step, but you were always already prompted to the problem. So you
Yeah,
had read the problem and you thought, okay, how can I solve this? And once you have posed yourself this question, then it makes much more sense when you hear it in the lecture. Like you hear,
yeah,
no, that makes sense. That's how you solve this problem. But I
yeah,
think
definitely. I mean,
it requires a creative person to come up with these problems, and also not for
uh,
all subjects is the same. Like some subjects, I think it's more difficult to come up with a problem like that or an exercise like that.
you mean, so the designing of curriculum, designing of these exercise, and all these things, that definitely requires a ton of creativity. It's
Yeah.
because it has been done the same way, right?
Mm.
And I mean, it's really easy to just refer to what are the books that are already existing in the field, and then kind of derive your own curriculum from those books. But to come up with an interesting way to
Mm.
you know help the students understand it better and
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
play with it, it's really a challenging thing, and not an easy thing to do, certainly.
Actually, in chess, it's a discipline on its own, coming up with interesting chess problems, and they even have like
Oh,
um, they give out like a rating to people how good the problems are of their puzzles that they come up with.
you're talking about the discipline of the coming up with new chess problems. Could you elaborate a bit about that?
Yeah, so chess is such a complex game, and there are certain tactics. So, for example, sometimes you can force a win from a certain position, and they can be quite beautiful actually. Like you wouldn't think of chess, or if you don't play chess, you wouldn't think about chess as something beautiful, but there is just a certain elegance to it, a certain beauty of how to solve certain problems. For example, if you have to sacrifice a piece to gain a positional advantage, which will eventually end up or result in your winning the game. And so you can come up with positions on the board, which may occur in a real game as well, of course. And sometimes they are actually derived from real games. So
Yeah.
usually when you play a tournament at chess, you note down your games, so you note down your moves, and after that you can replay the game and analyze it. And maybe there are some positions where you find a great tactical move which would have won you the game, which you didn't see during the game. But some people, they just create positions like that for you to solve, like for you to find the best move in. And yeah, this is a discipline where even ratings are given out to people who create those puzzles.
Okay.
Actually,
Yeah, that's quite. Yeah, sorry, you wanted to add something more there.
no, it was just redundant. Let's
Okay.
go on.
Yeah. So interesting that you're comparing designing a curriculum with, you know, coming up with new moves, a new set of moves for a chess game, for instance, because both of these problems can be really intensely hard and yet strainfully create. So uh, it would require you to be, extraordinarily creative, and also it is something that cannot be replicated, because for education we need something that's replicable, and creativity is something that we don't even understand very well now, and it's like it's impossible to even replicate something that we don't really
Yeah,
understand.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a really interesting, view of it. And yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why it's so hard. And I mean, what do you think is the solution for a better uh, education problem? Because I mean, it's also an exercise in developing creativity and using understanding creativity and utilizing it on a really uh, large scale, so that it can be applied to a variety of different disciplines. So maybe
mm,
using a creative approach to create a sort of a structure that can be applied to different kinds of fields, or maybe
mm,
there's no standard structure. I mean, the standard structure already exists, right?
yeah.
So or maybe it has to be specific to different disciplines, but then coming up with the reason why I'm talking about bringing a structure or standard to it, because education is something that needs to be scalable,
Mm.
and you cannot rely on creativity, although creativity is needed. So
I think so one development which I think is quite good currently is that you have many open education platforms that are sort of competitive, and I think this competitiveness brings with it like a need to create compelling problems. For example, if you
yeah,
think about open education platforms like edX, Coursera, and even more yeah economic or industry now, even more commercial um, websites like brilliant.org or Skillshare or things like that. They need to make their courses compelling and so that people will stick around, because obviously the people that are taking the courses are the customers, and they want to, it's like a given that they expect value from the course, so they have to
yeah,
be compelling. And I think many of the open education platforms are already head and shoulders above the university courses in some
yeah,
cases,
certainly.
um, because they provide a hands-on problem-solving approach. And you see, especially in computer science, you see many people like graduating from online courses and finding jobs, especially when it comes
Yeah,
to coding. Obviously, programming is quite. It's easier to find good problems for programming or to learn programming than for other disciplines, maybe. But even other disciplines, I think Brilliant.org has a lot of courses on the natural sciences like chemistry, biology, physics, and also mathematics in a way, um, and even theoretical computer science. And yeah, I think many of those courses are already better than what you have in universities, but the big problem still is accreditation. So the prestige of those courses is not high yet. So someone who's done 3 or maybe like a micro degree on Coursera, this won't be treated with the same respect as a university degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, but from a objective standpoint, when it comes to the efficiency of the courses, I think those courses are already superior to many university courses. And I think that should also be worrying for universities. So universities should aim at becoming better than that and update their education systems a little bit.
Yeah, yes, certainly. I mean, uh, also because studying at a university is not really cheap, right? I mean,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Germany, if you study in German, then probably you have to pay a very nominal fee, or something that's really negligible. But
yeah.
you know, all around the world, the top colleges are really expensive as well, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
it
definitely.
so it's not really. Uh, it also should put them. I mean, it's pressurizing for students because they want to get the best accreditation, as you mentioned. But at the
Mm.
same time, if the online courses give better quality, and maybe in the future if their accreditation also increases, which I assume it would certainly. I mean, the,
It's already happening, I think.
yeah,
So
it's already happening with Udacity and the
yeah,
micro masters and all these things. So then it would be really hard for traditional universities to keep up with the competition, because
yeah, yeah. I think the major maybe unique selling proposition of a traditional university would be like the face-to-face contact, where you can interact with the people
yeah,
at university, and you have hands-on research projects where you can participate in the process, which for me was a great way of learning. Like I think the most I've learned was from practice, really, in the research work that we do. But especially now when all the courses move online, yeah, the comparison is quite like the courses that were inherently online or that were online from the get-go are much better than what many courses do now in university.
yeah, certainly. I mean, the whole format is different. Of course, the aspect of human to human interaction is missing in the online
Yeah.
courses. But then for something like programming, you probably don't even need it that much, right?
And you
So
usually have a sort of a community tab where you can discuss
yeah,
ideas, maybe a Slack space where you have where you can meet other people.
yeah, probably. I think if instead, because that community is definitely helpful, but it's still not close to reality. Probably if
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
an aspect like video discussion of a live session as well, in apart from the video recordings and the exercise, a live session would also be involved, then the traditional universities might have a really hard time, because I mean the product is definitely way better than the popular universities are
Mm,
offering.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I I don't want to diminish what universities are doing as well, because I think
Yeah,
I would love if everything was better, and I'm also there are large differences between different courses. So I have had fantastic courses at university as well, and also
yeah,
some
yeah,
not so
yeah.
good ones.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, by this discussion that we are having, we are in no way trying to, demean the importance of traditional education. I mean, I, I definitely have learned a lot of things, and you are in direct contact with great professors who have had years of experience. So definitely that does make a difference. But the point of our discussion is to kind of think of an ideal system that might exist in the future if there are improvements, and
Yeah,
yeah, what are the other possibilities that can be considered. Yeah.
yeah.
So moving on from you know these discussions about education, and moving again to the deep philosophical part that we were in. What are the books that have had the most impact on your life? So,
Here. So the first one
wow.
is a book by Mason Curry. It's in German, but I think the no, I forgot the English title now. I think it's something about daily rituals. Yeah, maybe Daily Rituals is the title. It's a great
Okay.
little book. It started, I think it started out as a blog, and he collected information about uh, popular and famous people and how they structure their days and what their habits were. So not only not only contemporary persons, but for example, Ernest Hemingway, Vincent van Gogh, Pablo Picasso. So artists, scientists, and significant people from the past. And he collected sort of everything that he could find about their daily lives, which is really interesting. I think that gave me a lot of stuff or food for thought. Another book that I think had a great impact on me was this one here, um, by George Leonard. I think in English it's just called Mastery, and it's a book about how you. I think he's a what was it? I think Aikido teacher, like this combat sport or martial arts sport, and he outlines the process of becoming a master of a discipline and what pitfalls there are, and it's actually quite a deep book. So it's not. Yeah, I think it's a great read, and I haven't read it in a while, but it just stuck out to me when I looked at it in my bookshelf, and I really liked reading it. Um, yeah, because you learn sort of the principles behind progressing towards a goal for a long time, and how to not get stuck, because sometimes I think there are certain things where you just stay at one level for a time because you don't push forward anymore, and it's I think I'm not eloquent enough to summarize it right now, but it's definitely a great read if you're trying to stick with something for a longer time.
Yeah, these recommendations are like really interesting because I mean you selected the books from which you can derive something to implement in your life. So the first book that you were talking about was, about daily routines, rituals, and bringing a structure to your life. And then the second one was again about, uh, when you're pursuing goals, how to be persistent with them. And especially for the first one, I think I'll definitely read at least the first one, because I'm someone who always tries to structure his day. So I now have set reminders for different kinds of activities, and I try to keep the same structure for at least the first 5 days of the week. I mean, it's
Mm.
super hard to stay consistent because then there's also randomness as you proceed throughout the day. Maybe you get a call from someone, or you got
Yeah,
yeah,
sure. Something can throw you off.
something comes up. But
Are you
then I
still are you
try
still
to
doing this morning thing where you get up early and
the Wim Hof breathing thing.
yeah, right.
Yeah. It's part of my ritual now, and I think it's the most amazing thing ever. So because when you start your day, then after meditation, I practice this Wim Hof breathing technique, and this is so it kind of gives you a sense of high. It energizes you because you're breathing deeply and then holding your breath for around 1 minute. Uh, and yeah, so essentially this holding of the breath and releasing it suddenly after that would create a sense of high. I don't know how the science
Mhm.
behind how it works, but you feel really amazing in the morning, and I think it's a really good way to start your day. Before
You have to try it, man.
you have
Yeah.
to try it. I mean, this is like something I cannot describe in words.
Yeah.
This
I
is
recently
something
watched a video where there was like tape of someone who experienced that for the first time, and he's like also
yeah,
a very skeptical person, and he really had this effect of
yeah,
almost
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah.
high. and I found
Yeah,
that really interesting.
it's exactly a high, and this Wim Hof guy, I think he's from Netherlands or
Yeah, yeah,
something.
I
I think
think
he's
so.
from Netherlands. Yeah,
Yeah, the Iceman.
and then sorry.
I think he's also called the Iceman, right? He's also known for.
Yeah, exactly. He's also the guy who recommends taking cold showers, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he does really extreme stuff like going naked into the icy region. So that's really extreme. But what he recommends is taking the cold showers. I think you must have also tried cold showers, right?
Yeah, I did. I did. And for a time, it was really easy for me. Like at first, obviously not. I'm actually trying it at the moment. I try to get back into it.
Yeah.
I'm so far I'm only legs and arms, but I think I can progress.
Yeah, it's quite hard actually, but in a way you kind of train your mind to do hard things, because when you do it every day, then you're forcing yourself to go out there and do it.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
like the
when a
first win in
challenge
the morning.
comes, yeah, and when a challenge comes during the day, you already are, you're developing those mental calluses, as
Yeah,
David Goggins would put.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
guy
mean,
is crazy.
these crazy guys, but I think there's quite a few things that we can learn from these people.
Mm,
Was the fact that Wim Hof breathing actually mimics cold showers. So essentially, what you do when you're taking a cold shower is, okay, you are inside the bathroom, and then you turn the nozzle on at full cold level, and once the cold touches your body, and then what is the first thing that you do? What is your first instinct? The first instinct is that you breathe really deeply.
mm.
If you notice it, you have to breathe deeply. I mean, that's the natural response.
Yeah, but for me, the
So
natural response is also to not breathe at all. Like it's
yeah,
you
then
kind of
yeah.
get stuck, and you have to force yourself to breathe regularly, which makes it easier for you to expose yourself to it.
But then that's the wrong way to go about it, because Wim Hof mentions it in his video that you have to allow yourself to breathe naturally. You're kind of restricting yourself. So
Mm.
I think, I mean, based on what the videos I've seen. So yeah, you have to allow yourself to breathe deeply, and then what you do essentially is during the Wim Hof breathing is you take away that scary factor of standing vulnerable under the shower, and then you
Yeah.
just take the benefit and you can use it in your life. I think he kind of invented it, but also there are like similar
Mm.
methods in the Indian tradition, like pranayama. I don't know if you know about it, but
Yeah.
there are several breathing exercise that can also mimic the same effect essentially. So my last question would be, what are your suggestions to someone who wants to develop a work ethic like you, or who wants to, have a sense of purpose in what he's doing and be working really hard? Because it's not easy working hard. That's why it's called working hard, right? So
Mm.
what are your suggestions?
Yeah, that's actually a difficult question, I think, because I'm not sure. I'm coming from a position where I feel like this imposter syndrome stuff, because I'm not always like straight as an arrow and going into one direction. But I think one thing that I think I'm really grateful for that I did in the past is that I stuck with one thing for such a long time. So had I not started to, I mean, it would have been entirely possible to not pursue those data science stuff back then. I could have just left it behind and just go about my university courses. And I think having stuck with it for such a long time is just like it's unfathomable for me what would have happened if I hadn't. Because if I had only what I've learned in university and sort of passively only taken in what was taught in university, I would probably, yeah, I wouldn't be competent enough for a position that I really would enjoy. So yeah, I think a good way of motivating yourself is first of all having a vision for what you want to do, like actually defining the parameters of what you want your life to look like one day, but also realizing what would happen if you don't do what you like, the worst case scenario. I think that's a stoic idea to not really, but what would happen if you only made bad decisions from now on, and then
Okay.
sort of think this through and see where you land, make it really miserable. That can be a great motivator as well. And yeah, like having these motivations and then sticking with one thing for an extended period of time, which is very hard for me because I get easily interested in many things. So we talked about that on the phone several days ago. I always spread myself a little bit too thin because I'm interested in so many things. So yeah, I would say sticking with one thing that you can really see why it could be useful, that you like to do, and then just incrementally working on it over an extended period of time. And at some point, I think you don't really have to motivate yourself. It feels like if you're not motivated, then it's more like you have to think about what you're doing, like why is it not motivating, and yeah, but yeah, there are some frustrating things from every now and then. So it's not you don't, I think, not every frustrating work experience warrants an existential crisis. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fun way to put it. Yeah, I was going to stop. This was the last question, but I'll just follow up quickly with
Yeah, go
one or
ahead.
two more questions. So yeah, so you talk about this worst case scenario thing, and uh, always reminding yourself why you are doing it, if that's what you were trying to say. So I think it points to a sense of urgency, uh, while a sense of urgency with doing your work and doing it in a good way, like a really good way. And so how do you derive that sense of urgency? Where do you derive that sense of urgency from?
So, for example, so I try to make it as visceral as possible for me. So I try to really, really think myself into that position. So I picture myself, for example, in a job that I hate, maybe without a family, in a city where I don't know anyone. I don't know. I make it like a realistic scenario that could happen if I don't do something. Like if I only passively lived my life in one direction and didn't progress in any way. And that is something that is totally realistic, I think. Like it's not that it's impossible. Like I don't picture myself like in a war zone, in a zombie apocalypse, which would suck obviously, but it's not very likely to happen. But things
Yeah.
that are likely to happen that are not good, and if you make that really concrete, and yeah, let your creativity like spin around, make like a little sad story for yourself in the future, that can be motivating as hell when you think about,
uh,
or when you feel like you want to rather procrastinate or watch a Netflix show or something, then it's really good to have this movie play in the back of your mind and motivate you to do something to progress in life.
but doesn't that make you take life too seriously in a way, if you're visualizing the worst case scenario all the time? And then,
Yeah. So
I
I,
mean,
I
it has
wouldn't
its
overdo it.
advantages but disadvantages as well, right?
I mean, obviously, when you slack off once, it's not a very bad thing. I think
Yeah.
only if you, after maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks, and you were really unproductive, and you feel like you're only yeah, procrastinating or doing unproductive things, then it's maybe time to activate that vision. Because
Yeah.
essentially, I mean, what else is it? Like, I don't want to spend my life like passively sitting at home watching Netflix. Like,
Yeah, certainly.
that's not the person that I want to perceive myself as, and that's not the person that I want to become. And if that's what I'm doing for an extended period of time, then I have to question, am I still going into the right direction? What can I do to motivate myself again? Yeah.
So yeah. So I just ask you one more question. So what is
Yeah,
your
go ahead.
vision for yourself? Like you talk about defining your vision. I'm just adding these questions because I'm like I feel too inspired talking to you because I mean, uh, yeah, it's really interesting stuff that you're sharing. So what is
Thanks.
your vision for yourself?
Ha. So I can really see myself pursuing a career in science because, yeah, I love this process of um, discovering problems, sort of, and then trying to solve them in any way. And I'm not saying that I'm still not. I'm really a beginner so far. Like, I mean, I'm not even finished with my studies, and I'm only just building up my toolbox for tackling problems. But the further I get, the more interesting it gets. So I read problems, I understand, or I read papers, and I understand better what the current problems or the current challenges are. And yeah, for me, it's really fun to yeah, use everything that is in my arsenal to solve these problems. And yeah, that would be one way maybe. But I can also see myself working yeah, in a somewhere in the industry. So if it's something where I can do something really cool, I for a long time I wanted to become a data scientist, and I still think that could be something that I can see myself do in the future. So that's something that I would like to do. I have some crazy ideas, but I'm going to tell you about them. Like, I have some crazy ideas about uh, entrepreneurial stuff that I might pursue in some point. It's more
Okay.
like crazy stuff that's in my mind, and I always keep like a notebook open when I think of something and want to note it down. Yeah, but those are not ready enough, or not mature enough to be stated on record, I think.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much, Johannes. It was really a pleasure to have this enriching and really deep conversation with you. Like we talked deeply about your, research work, your data analysis projects, and the works that you did in communication aspects and all these things. And then we went really deep into the philosophical aspects about work and all these things. So it was like really a pleasure to get to hear these ideas, and I'm sure the people who would be listening to this would also definitely enjoy it, and not just enjoy it but learn quite a few things from this. So
Thanks,
thank you
Max.
very much.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, like to be on your podcast. It was really fun, and I think it's also a testament to your interviewer skills that we could talk for such a long time.
Thank you
I
very
hope I
much.
didn't bore
I
you
mean,
to death for this extended amount of time. But yeah,
oh, it was incredibly interesting. I mean, it was really nice and an enriching experience for me. So, thank you
thanks,
very much.
appreciate
Okay.
it. Are you still there, Chandandeep? Are you still
Uh,
there?